Forget frequently asked questions.
Common sense, common knowledge, or Google.
How about advice from a real genius? 95% of people in any profession are good enough to be qualified and licensed. 5%
go above and beyond.
They become very good at what they do, but only
0.1%
are real geniuses. Richard Jacobs has made it his life's mission to find them for you. He hunts down and interviews geniuses in every field: sleep science, cancer, stem cells, ketogenic diets, and more. Here come the geniuses. This is the Finding Genius Podcast
with Richard Jacobs.
Before we begin, a note from our sponsor. I'm Richard Jacobs, Executive Director of the nonprofit Finding Genius Foundation and host of the Finding Genius Podcast. In late 2016, I was rear-ended at 65 miles an hour by a truck on the highway, which sent me off-road into a ditch. The impact of the collision gave me a concussion and other injuries. At the hospital, a CT scan showed that I had thyroid nodules, which turned out to be cancer. It was then, when I had a biopsy of my neck, that I realized even if I was a millionaire, I wouldn't want a second or a third biopsy due to the pain and the invasiveness of it. And appointments at that time for thyroid experts were 3 to 6 months out. And I was worried about dying now, even if that was irrational. So because of this, I've decided to raise money to conduct a literature review on steroids, on the causes of anxiety and depression, a condition that affects well over 50 million people in the United States and hundreds of millions worldwide. Our goal is to create a codex, a guide that reveals all possible treatments for anxiety and depression for people that live with the condition, or for loved ones that have it, as my wife and my son do. To find out more about our fundraiser, visit findinggeniusfoundation.org and click on current initiatives. And now, to our guest.
Hello, this is Richard Jacobs with the Finding Genius Podcast, now part of the Finding Genius Foundation.
My guest today is Dr. Jim Woody. He's the CEO of 180 Life Sciences, a clinical stage biotech company focused on novel drugs for unmet needs in inflammatory diseases such as fibrosis and pain. Dr. Woody was a founder and served as chairman of the board of directors for Viracta Pharmaceuticals, a lymphoma therapeutic company. He's also served in a variety of health and management roles, including president of Roche Bioscience and CSO and SVP of R&D for Centocor, where he was part of the team that discovered Remicade, name is also trademarked, to treat arthritis, which is now one of the best-selling drugs in the world for arthritis. Dr. Woody has also served as commanding officer and director at the U.S. Naval Medical Research and Development Command. He holds an MD from Loma Linda University and a PhD from the University of London. So,
Jim, thanks for coming.
Thank you, Richard. It's my pleasure.
Yeah, so tell me about 180 Life Sciences. The website looks like is 180lifesciences.com. Tell me about the company and your involvement with it.
Sure. 180 Life Sciences was actually put together from 3 prior companies. We had one company in the UK around Oxford, England, that was working on research and therapies using anti-TNFs. We have another company in Israel working on cannabinoid compounds that are very unique. And a third one here in Palo Alto, California, working on another set of inflammatory compounds. So we're trying to treat inflammation, fibrosis, and pain. So we brought all 3 of these together under a SPAC and went public back in November of 2020.
Okay, and what's the current actions of 180 Life Sciences today? Like, what's the focuses of the company?
Yeah, we're focusing on inflammation, fibrosis, and pain, which is a sort of common problem around the world with rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease and psoriasis and a whole variety of other things, including the COVID pulmonary problems are kind of inflammatory. And so we put together a team of researchers, experienced researchers to work on this. Dr. Mark Feldman formed the organization. He and I worked together a long time ago when I was chief scientific officer at Centocor, and we were the very first ones to ever make an anti-TNF antibody that was administered to humans. And we showed in rheumatoid arthritis that we could stop the disease and actually save the joints. And now there's probably over 40 million people who've been treated, and has a huge industry for anti-TNF therapies worldwide. There's no patients left in wheelchairs with rheumatoid arthritis because of that drug and the follow-on.
What does that mean, anti-TNF? Can you describe the drug and how it works?
Sure. In your body, there's a whole bunch of proteins circulating around that kind of messengers, and they tell other cells and organs what to do. They're called cytokines, and most of them are good ones. Some of them are bad actors, and one of the bad actors is called TNF, tumor necrosis factor. It's kind of a misnomer for the name because it was discovered by a person who used it to destroy tumors. That never worked clinically, but it stuck with the name, so it's tumor necrosis factor. So this is one of the bad cytokines that activates the inflammatory system. It can destroy your joints in rheumatoid arthritis. It can destroy your colon in Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. So it's a bad actor, and we have a way to finally block it. This was the first major breakthrough for rheumatoid arthritis and Crohn's disease probably in 100 years in terms of therapy for them. And now it's widely used on basically everyone.
And is that the drug called Remicade, or is that something different?
That was called Remicade. Now there's a variety of others. The largest selling one is from AbbVie called Tumor. It's a slightly better version, but it does the same things. And it sells for $20 billion a year. So AbbVie's done pretty well off of our invention. And there's basically been no changes in therapeutic indications for the last 28 years since we invented Remicade. And so now we've found at least 3 new ones that we think are going to be blockbusters in themselves.
Okay, and then just to recap, so the current initiatives of 180 Life Sciences now are what? And I'll ask you a few questions about them if it's okay.
Yeah, in the anti-TNF area, we're treating a condition called Dupuytren's, which is a condition of the palm of the hand, and a nodule begins to form there. And over maybe a year or so, it begins to form a fibrosis tissue in the hand, and it pulls your fingers together until you can't button your clothes, you can't type, you can't play an instrument, you can't do a lot of things. So you have a real disability. And there's several therapies that people try, steroids, Xiaflex, which is a collagenase, and eventually they all go to surgery, which was what happened to my wife a couple of years ago when she developed Dupuytren's. So that's one area, and we found that if you inject these nodules with this anti-TNF, we think we can prevent the disease from forming altogether. And we've completed a 181-patient clinical trial to show that. And we will be carrying on with that. Let me shut off my phone here. And that is completed, and they're doing the analysis, probably be out about fourth quarter. So that's...
What are the reasons that fibrosis happens, like in that context or in other contexts you work in? Like, what do you think of the biological mechanisms that cause it?
Well, I think the Dupuytren's has a large genetic overlay because people from Scandinavian countries have probably twice or 3 times as much as other people. It affects about 12 million patients in the U.S. and 12 million in the EU, but quite a few of them are in the Scandinavian countries. And how it starts and why is a little unclear. We don't know what begins this process, but it starts as a small nodule in your hand, which we can hopefully treat and prevent it before it becomes disabling. Because if it becomes disabling, the therapy's long and you eventually have to have surgery, which isn't exactly satisfactory. My wife's condition is partially back now after the surgery. So it's not good. Better if we can prevent the whole thing.
So what do you think? Do you think the TNF has it been used clinically yet, or has it gone through clinical trials? What stage is it at, this therapy you're contemplating?
Yeah, so we did a small trial of about 30 patients where we pulled out the nodules and figured out how much anti-TNF we had to inject into them to shut off the fibrosis process because we know the molecular mechanisms of how the fibrosis is formed, and we're able to shut that off with anti-TNF. And then, as I said, we did a 181-patient randomized trial, half treated with anti-TNF and half with placebo, and we'll see what the results are come fourth quarter.
Okay, and what other conditions are you working in addition to this one?
So there's another condition called frozen shoulder, where your shoulder becomes exceedingly painful, and that lasts for several months, and then it goes into kind of a frozen category where you can't move it anymore. And about half of those people have Dupuytren's contracture as well, more common in diabetics. And we think that the fibrosis process in your shoulder is probably similar to the one in your palm of your hand with Dupuytren's. So we'll be injecting the anti-TNF into the shoulder joint again as soon as they develop pain, hopefully to prevent the whole fibrosis process and the need for surgery. A third condition is quite interesting. It's called postoperative cognitive dementia. And what we're finding is in older people is they do these extensive surgeries. Following the surgeries, a fair percentage of them have a dementia, and some percentage of them never recover, and they end up in a nursing home and eventually die because.
What do you mean? What kind of surgeries? Like immediately, acutely after the person has dementia that lingers?
Before we continue, I've been personally funding the Finding Genius podcast for 4.5 years now, which has led to 2,700 plus interviews of clinicians, researchers, scientists, CEOs, and other amazing people who are working to advance science and improve our lives and our world. Even though this podcast gets 100,000 plus downloads a month, we need your help to reach hundreds of thousands more worldwide. Please visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click on Support Us. We have 3 levels of membership from $10 to $49 a month, including perks such as the ability to see ahead in our interview calendar and ask questions of upcoming guests, transcripts of podcasts you're interested in, the ability to request specific topics or guests, and more. Visit findinggeniuspodcast.com and click Support Us today. Now back to the show.
No, it's sort of like CABG procedure, coronary artery bypass graft, when they do hip replacements or emergency hip repairs or any kind of major surgery. And the theory here is that during the surgical process, the damage to the tissue releases TNF, and this TNF goes to the brain and opens up the brain, and a lot of these chemical mediators that are harmful get into the brain, especially in the areas where the cognitive domains reside. And we think we can prevent that whole thing with anti-TNF. And so we're gearing up a trial to actually do this in patients, probably start the first part of next year, where we're going to, right before surgery, give them a small amount of anti-TNF, so see if we can block that. So up until now, the surgeons have accounted this dementia on different kinds of anesthesia, but we think it's due to anti-TNF, and our people have been right before in a lot of these indications. We have animal models and other things to really support that, and we know that in patients, the levels of TNF they have are associated with the levels of dementia they have. So we think this will be a quite interesting trial and be very helpful because there's 10 million surgeries a year in the U.S., same in the EU. So it's a huge market.
Well, what percentage of them lead to this type of dementia? And how old is old? Like, what are the common circumstances when a patient will have this resulting dementia?
I think it's predominantly, say, after 60. And it's seen in various trials. You look at the data, it's anywhere between 20 and 30%. Now, most of them resolve in the next 3 weeks or so. They call it, surgical fog or whatever they want to call it. But then about another 20% don't recover, and it goes on for over a year until they end up in nursing home or have to be cared for.
Is it accelerated in comparison to, let's say, the onset of Alzheimer's or other dementias, or is it kind of follow the same curve, is just suddenly seeded and the person has it, or like what's it look like for them clinically throughout that year?
Well, I think, if they have any of the underlying conditions like, early Alzheimer's or something that's obviously much worse, or they have some other kind of dementia, it predisposes them to much more severe. I think that what happens is that they just never recover from the surgery, and they always have this fog, and it continually gets worse until, like I said, they're incapable of caring for themselves. That's what our data so far has shown.
So what would be the protocol? Like right after surgery, would you give them a succession of, injections or, intravenously? Like how do you think this would work best?
We think that the intravenous infusion of anti-TNF would be started just before the surgery. So if there's any TNF released from the tissue damage, it immediately is disabled by the antibody, and that it'll just be a one-time dose.
Okay, so are you in clinical trials for this yet, or like how would that work to test it?
The protocols are all done and ready to go. We will start the trials probably at the end of the year. The issue has been that with COVID, it's difficult to get the patients in and get them treated. But my guess is by then we'll have things under control and be able to start the trial. We've got some of the sites already set up, ready to go, but it's just it's being done in the UK, and with the COVID outbreak with Delta, they're still having a lot of problems with their ICU beds and surgical beds being occupied by those patients.
Are you able to draw any data from the the work you've already done? Like you said, the issue in the hand, I don't quite remember the name of the condition, but if you do inject someone with TNF and it helps that condition, do those people tend to go on to surgery to treat it, or are they post-op where you do that? And is there any overlap between the dementia from a surgery for that condition versus other conditions?
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
Well, the Dupuytren's contracture is all very local, so none of the TNF goes out, and it's just treating the lesions. Same with the frozen shoulder. It's all local treatment in the joint. So I wouldn't expect anything to be caused by that. For the surgeries, then, like I said, at the time they begin the surgeries, they'll infuse the anti-TNF and block any TNF that's released during any tissue damage. And hopefully we'll see a benefit to those patients in terms of those that got placebo, which would be saline, versus those who got anti-TNF in terms of development of dementia and persistence of dementia.
Yeah, I just didn't know if people with frozen shoulder tend to be, get operated on at some point, and what happens to them. Are there particular surgeries that lead to this dementia and other ones that don't? Like, you're able to characterize, if the surgery works on this part of the body, the incidence of this post-surgery dementia is higher?
Yeah, I think that it's seen more in really significant surgery like cardiothoracic or coronary artery bypass graft, where there's a lot of tissue damage as they do all these surgeries, or aggressive hip replacement and repairs, maybe other surgeries where there's a lot of tissue damage. Those would be the ones where we would expect to see the most post-operative dementia. Not so much in maybe local procedures like frozen shoulder surgery or hand surgery, more in the larger tissue damage type of surgeries.
So have you identified if there's genetic predispositions to people having this post-surgery dementia? And if so, have you characterized them? Have you found any of this?
We haven't looked at that particular aspect as yet. We may along the way, but at this point, no, we haven't done that.
Okay, and what's the timeline? At which point will these therapies be in clinical applications? Is the hand issue one now in clinic, or if not, when? And same with frozen shoulder, and then with this post-surgery dementia. Yeah,
like I said, the Dupuytren's trial is complete. The data is being analyzed. When we get the data, we'll go to the European and UK regulatory agencies to see if they might approve it, because there were no adverse events in the whole trial. We know which antibody we've used, and it's quite safe. And if it eliminates the Dupuytren's onto the disability contracture, we've done everybody a favor, including the patients. So we'll see if that's an approvable trial. And at the same time, we'll open discussions with the US FDA in terms of starting similar trials in the US. For frozen shoulder, we'll probably treat about 50 patients and see if we can prevent the pain and also prevent the progression to the really frozen shoulder part and perhaps the surgery. That the first patient injected in that will be probably mid-September, something like that. And post-operative dementia will probably be, like I said, first quarter or second quarter of next year as we put all the pieces together.
What other maladies or diseases do you think TNF plays a large role in? Because you found it looks like perhaps at least 3. Is there a whole host of other ones? And I know you don't have time and resources to chase down every one, but are you even able to say other applications that you're looking for in the future? Well,
we know that the TNF is driving the fibrosis in these 2 conditions, and we're thinking that it might have a role in, say, NASH, non-alcoholic steatohepatitis, hepatitis, and that eventually forms a formation. We're looking into that to see if TNF might block that process, but we don't know yet. That's research going on. So we will see how that plays out. So there's maybe a number of these fibrosis conditions that we might be able to treat. They'd be rather unique, but it would be quite beneficial to patients for sure.
Yeah, excellent. And I know with clinical trials, you don't know when. It could be, 1, 2, 3, 5, even 10 years. So, I was going to ask you, when do you think these will be again in clinic? But I know it depends on a lot of factors. So, but hopefully in the next few years, it sounds like maybe all 3 of the applications will see clinical use.
Yeah, I think by the end of next year, all of them will be in the clinic. We'll have quite a lot of data and be able to then decide how to proceed with both trials in the U.S. and maybe in the rest of the world. So all of that's to come, but we're pretty optimistic right now.
Yeah. Any additional future plans for 180, or is this plenty to work on, or are there other focuses?
We're working with a Dr. Michelin in Israel, who is actually the founder of the endocannabinoid human system. So he knows more about cannabis and the molecules that cause different things than anybody else in the world. And so we're making some synthetic cannabinoids that won't have the hallucinations and they won't lead to addiction. But we already know that they work by reducing inflammation and also pain. And we have already selected the lead candidate, and we have the information, at least in animal models, that they work in those 2 areas. And so that's another program we'll be bringing along. Again, it matches into our other inflammation and pain part of our overall strategy. So that's another one that we'll be bringing along. Those trials will probably be starting. There'll be pre-IND studies in the next month or 2, and then probably into the clinic about middle of next year. Okay.
And one quick question. IND is, what does that stand for?
Investigational new drug. And how the process works, if you have a medicine that you want to use to treat patients in the U.S. under the FDA, you have to file what they call an investigational new drug permit. And this is all the information you know about the drug, all the animal models, what you think, why you're doing it, what the structure is. It's a huge amount of information that you give to the FDA, and you outline then how you want to use it in an early stage trial with the protocol and all the details. And the FDA looks at this and they'll say, okay, we want you to do this and this and this, or we want you to do it this way. And you then negotiate with them as to what's the best path forward. So it's a pretty big process, takes probably 6 or 8 months to get all these pieces together in conjunction with the FDA. But once you have that in place, then you can go ahead and start treating patients for the indication that you're mapping out.
Okay. Well, very good. Why is it called 180 Life Sciences? Are you trying to do a 180 with people where you're turning them around from their illness and making them better, or is there another reason for the name?
Well, like I said, in the 28 years since Dr. Feldman and I invented Remicade, there's basically been nothing much new for anti-TNF until we came around. So ours is like 180-degree change in direction. We're saying here's a whole new other set of indications that are different from what you've been doing. And there's 5 approved anti-TNFs in the U.S. and probably 10 biosimilars coming along. And they all do exactly the same thing. So there's not as much innovation there as we would expect. So our scientists and colleagues have found new applications for these drugs. So that's where the 180 comes from.
Okay. Well, very good. Well, Dr. Woody, what's the best place for people to find out more about 180 Life Sciences and your work? Where should they go?
Well, we have a website, 180lifesciences.com is probably the best place. And that's where we'll list all of our details of progress and our press releases and filings with the SEC and all those other things would be there if they're interested.
Very good. Well, Dr. Woody, thanks so much for coming. And it's fantastic that you helped develop Remicade and it's helped so many people. And it sounds like you're on track to help a whole bunch more. So thank you for what you do and for coming.
That's it. That's the goal, is to really help the patients, because it's the important part. So I'm very pleased to be able to do this.
If you like this podcast, please click the link in the description to subscribe and review us on iTunes.
You've been listening to the Finding Genius podcast with Richard Jacobs. If you like what you hear, be sure to review and subscribe to the Finding Genius podcast on iTunes or wherever you listen to podcasts. And want to be smarter than everybody else? Become a premium member at findinggeniuspodcast.com. This podcast is for information only. No advice of any kind is being given. Any action you take or don't take as a result of listening is your sole responsibility. Consult professionals when advice is needed.